What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Buffalo Dash. We got a lot of breakdown in this past week in Colorado basketball. The redemption—I wouldn't say redemption win, but the good win against Washington State on Wednesday, and then the heartbreaking loss yesterday to Utah. Kieran, I want to throw it over to you. There's definitely some good and bad this past week, but obviously the bad's going to outweigh the good just because of how crushing that defeat was 2 days ago against Utah. Tell me your thoughts, your big takeaways from this past week.
Yeah, so I think it was good to see us get the win against Washington State. Obviously, a team that we shouldn't have had trouble with in the first place when we were in Washington, and so it's good to see them. It's good to see the Buffs sort of seem to find themselves, at least initially, for this five game homestand, starting with that Washington State game at home, and just playing sort of their brand of basketball, straight through. It was sort of just like another day in the office kind of day. And then, as you said, obviously yesterday, really, really tough loss for the Buffs. To what was a 6-7 is now a 7-7 University of Utah team that we had already beat in Salt Lake City, and really just we had no business losing to, especially if we want to compete sort of at the most elite level come March Madness. I think it was tough to see, especially sort of in the late stages of that second half, sort of the last quarter of the game or so. Just very sluggish offense, kind of lazy defense, sending Utah to the line when we couldn't really be affording to. Us not really sort of pushing the floor and sort of utilizing being at altitude and everything to our advantage. And as a result, Alfonso Plummer from University of Utah sort of was able to capitalize on that. The guy's sort of a streaky scorer, and while going scoreless in the first half, then proceeded to just absolutely, close what was, a 19-point deficit for them, and ultimately, squeak out a Boulder with a 3-point win. And so I think that's not, playing that sort of lazy basketball is just really not going to do the Buffs. It's not going to get the Buffs where they want to go. Certainly when it comes to the postseason. And it made me, it made me hesitant because, a team that we've sort of touted their depth, on more than a few occasions and stuff, sort of we've harkened back to the fact that when they don't have players that are sort of stepping up and, going all out, that we've been able to rely on our bench. And then, in this Utah game, we really sort of struggled to see anybody really step up for the Buffs when other players on the team were lacking. And as a result, it was sort of just was a team loss, which was tough to see. And so, and I think that it's certainly not the kind of thing that we can't come back from, but it's absolutely the kind of thing that we can't afford to have happen again this season, or else we're really not going to be able to sort of compete and be equally relevant. When it comes to the postseason, as I think we hope to be, if we're taking losses to this weak of a team. But I mean, what were your thoughts?
I think the key word you said there, especially for the Utah game, was the team loss. Look, they played 30 minutes of absolutely knockout basketball in that Utah game, and I'll get to the Washington State game in a second because I think that kind of foreshadowed what we were going to see from Utah. But they absolutely dominated Utah in that first half. Like I said, they built that 19-point lead up with only 10 minutes to go in the game, and it's a Tad Boyle coached basketball team has always been defense and rebound minded, always first. It was always offense second, rebounding and defense has been first, and it's to see this kind of just sheer collapse on mostly the defensive side. I'm not exactly pleased that the offense kind of went silent, but just the defense absolutely crumble, and just to allow Plummer to absolutely go off. Plummer's a good guy, and like you said, he's a really streaky scorer. The fact that they held them scoreless in the first half, and then in about 8 minutes scored 21 points. He basically solely brought them back from the dead, and provided that Utah team with a spark. And it's a little disheartening that this team can't seem to play 40 minutes of complete basketball. Now this goes back to the Washington State game. That sure, they beat Washington State by, I believe it was 12, 70-58. But that game again was a blowout going into the half. And sorry, not a blowout, but a good game. Colorado comes out, gains the advantage in the first 7 minutes of the second half, and then just kind of goes into cruise mode, allows Washington State to come back, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a second, this has become a 4-point game. At one point it did. It's like, yeah, sure, you win by 12, but this team doesn't know how to play, in my mind, a complete 40-minute basketball game. They know how to play like 25 minutes, maybe 30 at most. Like we saw in the Utah game. They played 30 minutes of lights-out basketball. Everything was going right. They had built up that 19-point lead, and then 10 minutes left. They're like, oh, this game's over. Let's coast to a victory. That's obviously not what happened. And, Utah caught fire. They allowed the one guy that can beat them, which was Plummer, to beat them. And, you got to give credit to Plummer. It's pretty impressive to score 20 points in 7.5 minutes. You can't discredit the guy's talent and his scoring ability because he's one of the best scorers in the Pac-12. But it's like with a 19-point lead with under 10 minutes to go, that kind of stuff just doesn't happen. It can't happen. Like you said, if you want to compete for the top spot in the Pac-12, and I think most of all, like, this team has been, I wouldn't say disrespected all year, but there were times that this team deserved to be maybe nationally ranked or get a little more national recognition than they were getting. It's like these type of losses only just fuel the fire to all the doubters that they have in this team, that this team isn't for real, that this team blows 19-point leads and can't close out games with under 10 minutes left. And it's like, this team has the talent and has the depth, like we've discussed, to compete for the Pac-12 championship and can go far into March Madness. But with a showing like they ended Washington State, and especially how they ended that Utah game, like you said, it's just not going to do it for them. They have to figure out what's going on, because if they don't figure it out, we're going to have a repeat of what happened last year.
Yeah, so I think you're exactly spot on with with saying how it just fuels like the doubters sort of argument that CU basketball isn't, here to be able to compete, for real, and that, perhaps, playing in the Pac-12, which is sort of a notoriously, slightly weaker, or, as far as basketball goes, perhaps a bit weaker than, the Big 12, Big 10, ACC conferences that, and as far as the Power 5 conference goes, doesn't kind of quite stack up. And as a result, I mean, for all the CU fans out there, it's the kind of thing where those people who, are going to want to believe in this team come March, once this team, once March Madness happens and stuff, are with play like this bound to be disappointed by CU losing to, one of those schools that makes it into March Madness that's sort of, a bit of a no-name school, sort of like comes out of, a really small conference out of, like the Midwest or something like that, and loses to like a Loyola Chicago or, whomever, right? And it's going to be, and then CU fans are going to be looking in the mirror like, what went wrong here? What was the, like how did we, as, this like, Power 5 school who, has seen some success, in basketball this year, absolutely, and at the end of last year, and sort of seeing the steady rise in success, under the leadership of Tad Boyle, suddenly have a loss like this sort of stun us and all of a sudden knock us out of postseason play. And so I think for that not to happen to the Buffs, and for the Buffs to be able to then legitimately believe in their chances to be successful in March, I think they've got to step up step up their level of play, or at least maybe rethink like when certain guys are getting, certain minutes in order to be able to close out, all 40 minutes of play. Because obviously, like you just said, this is not going to be the kind of thing. This is just, it's not going to be the kind of thing where this is going to fly, and it's not going to be acceptable. And this team is not going to see the success that it should. If they can't just close out games like that and can't play 40 minutes.
Yeah, I think you hit it exactly right, which kind of takes us into our next topic, which basically is that this team needs to wake up. We're getting quite close to the point last year where this team kind of started to fall apart. At this point last year, we were hyping up this team, and they were looking good, and then they went on that 5-game losing streak. This team still has a little bit of time to get it together, and then they lost to Washington State in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament. Then obviously COVID hit, everything was canceled, so we never really got to see what was going to happen to that team. But we're starting to tread that water again. Like we discussed in last week's episode, that this 5-game homestand is truly the defining kind of 2 weeks of this team's identity right here. You went 1-1 in a week where you should have gone 2-0. Obviously, the Utah game is an absolute confidence killer, much like that Washington game that you lost in Seattle, which a little more forgivable just because you were in Seattle and that kind of stuff, and you could have afforded that. But you got a tough 8 days coming up with Arizona State, who's playing really good basketball of late, and they have Remy Martin and a really stacked squad that can come in here and just kind of shock you and win basketball games. Arizona, which for some reason is always a team that we struggle with. It doesn't really matter, but they have a good team as well. And then an Oregon State team that beat Arizona State, that has given UCLA and Washington a run for the money. That these three games, it's imperative to at least come out 2-1. A loss to an Arizona looks a lot better than a loss to an Oregon State or an Arizona State. Like we'll discuss in the next segment, where this team kind of stands, what they need to do going forward, that this is the week that they really need to wake up. They need to reinvent themselves and truly just stick to the basics. We've seen this team throughout this year kind of go on hot and cold streaks. There's hot streaks where they look absolutely unbeatable, that the offense is clicking, that the defense is playing just unreal basketball. And we got to get back to that. This team has to, like I said, it sounds corny to say they have to play 40 minutes of basketball, but they really have to. If you don't play 40 minutes of basketball, the Utah game's going to happen every single time you play. You're going to jump out to this huge lead with 10 minutes left. You're going to be like, oh, this game's over. And before you know it, it's a tie game, and all the momentum is switched. You're totally out of sorts. You're scrambling to take bad shots. Your defense is lacking. And this is a time where a guy like McKinley Wright, a guy like Jariah Horn, and a guy like Evan Batty need to step up and talk to this team and say, look, that Utah game, sure, we let it slip away. That's on us. But we have 3 big home games coming up where we can regain this confidence, regain this momentum, prove to ourselves that we're a good basketball team, because that's truly what matters. Not proving to everybody else that you're a good basketball team, proving to yourselves that you can win basketball games, that you're a good team, and then go into that Northern California road trip and going to Stanford and going to Cal and prove that you are the elite in the Pac-12 and you are where you belong.
I agree. So, I think it really kind of comes down to this question of I think the underlying question here, when we're sort of discussing, how this team is going to, elevate its play, for a full 40 minutes and be able to beat some of these teams that, it's fallen to in the last several weeks, is to what standard are they willing to sort of hold themselves to, right? Because obviously that the limit of that scope does not necessarily end with the Pac-12, and I think it'd be foolish to allow it to, because as I mentioned, the Pac-12 has some good teams in it this year. Has some good teams in it usually annually, but I mean, a Pac-12 team hasn't won an NCAA championship in recent memory. I mean, I'd have to look up like the last time that a Pac-12 team won a national championship, and so then when considering like what standard we're willing to hold ourselves to in terms of level of play, you've got to consider the fact that teams in other Power Five conferences who are playing just super difficult schedules, they a Coach K team, a John Calipari team, any of those sort of perennial powerhouses are not allowing themselves, they don't allow for themselves to even like lose a game during their regular season. You know what I mean? Oftentimes, many of those teams, their sole losses come in the postseason, and it's like the loss that puts them out of the tournament. It's like, but like that, like they're able to string together week in and week out a full 40 minutes of play. In their 2 or 3 games, each week, and certainly at home. Absolutely. I mean, like a Duke team is just not going to lose, at Cameron. Like it's not. And so, if like a Duke team's not losing at Cameron Indoor Stadium and they guarantee to themselves, at the beginning of the season, we're not going to lose at home, whether it's in front of the crazies or whether it's, in a year like this when, it's an empty stadium, it's the kind of thing where when they decide that for themselves and then proceed to, make that the standard to which they hold themselves throughout the entire season, CU needs to be doing the same thing. And the players need to be doing the same thing because, Tad Boyle, he's a very experienced coach who can, he can expect that from his players, but the players have to, sort of buy into that being the mentality that's going to be able to get you through, to a successful postseason rather than, sort of just like kind of coasting as they are. And so I think that ultimately, they sort of really need to revert back to the fundamental, like just the very, very fundamental basketball that they were playing at the beginning of the year. I mean, when they sort of got off to, that sort of hot start initially, it was this, it was them just playing very basic basketball, very just basic team basketball, selfless play, just like, looking for the extra pass, hustle, and the hustle wasn't lacking. You know what I mean? They were getting up and down the court both ways, like the energy was there. And then, and just focusing on those basic things was allowing them to win games. And so I think that if they're able to, sort of refocus on that being just what they need to do at a basic level in order to be successful over the course of the next certainly this next 3 games of this sort of 5-game homestand. I think that's where they might be able to sort of find themselves like as a team, because I wouldn't say that they necessarily need to reinvent themselves. They've had aspects of their season this year which have been bright. They've had aspects of their season this year which has been indicative of a team that is a top 25 team, and could very well be a contender for a national championship, but not, the last several games have told, certainly the games in Washington and the last 2 games at home, have told a different story. And so I get that, fatigue starts to, come into play and things like that, but this is the kind of thing that just, it can't happen.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of transitions into, basically, what has happened to this team, where this team goes from here. Before I kind of get into, why this team's in trouble, we can bad talk this team all we want, and kind of say, this team's kind of lost its edge, but this team is still ranked 20th in the net rankings, still the highest Pac-12 team ranked by at least 6 spots. USC comes in at 26. And then in the KenPom rankings, Colorado currently sits at 18, which is 3 spots ahead from USC, who is currently 21. Colorado also has the 13th ranked adjusted offense in the nation. Look, this team isn't bad. Okay, they proved it this year. This team arguably could be one of the best we've seen in the past 10 years. We saw, Spencer Dinwiddie come through, Derek White, those teams that were really good. And this team has the potential to arguably be the best we've seen, like I said, in the past 10 years. And they've shown it this year. They've shown it in the game against that ranked Oregon team at home. They showed it against, that gritty win at Utah, that place we hadn't won since 2012. They showed it in that Stanford win when they thoroughly dominated a team that was picked to finish in the top 4 in the Pac-12 at the beginning of the season. They showed it against a USC team who was currently 13-3 when they beat him at the Galen Center in Southern California. They showed it against that UCLA game. Even though they only lost by 3. They showed that they are a good team, that a UCLA team that is probably the top of the Pac-12 right now. It's simple that this team, like you said, they don't need to reinvent themselves. That they need to get back to basics. They prove that they can play fantastic basketball. Taking that extra pass, passing up a good look for a better look. Playing clamps on defense, because I know that just absolutely annoys Tal Boyle when they're getting out rebounded, when they're not playing extremely good defense. That it kind of tips his lid, and we've seen him get pretty angry on the sideline. But as much as he can do for this team, and as much as he can implement, a game plan and coach his team and try to get his players going, it really comes down to the players. And like I said, it comes down to a guy like McKinley Wright. This is the time where he can prove that he already is NBA caliber talent. He's proved it last year. He's the all-time assist leader, and it's still counting. Arguably one of the greatest basketball players to ever come out of Colorado. The record breaker. This is the time where he can not only prove that he can produce, but he can also be the guy that a team rallies around and kind of gets their feet again and gets back to the winning ways that he's shown he can do, that this team's shown that they can do. That he can prove to NBA teams that when my team is down and my team is struggling and we're coming off a debilitating loss, that I'm the guy that rallies these guys together. I'm the guy that shows up and not necessarily leads a team in scoring, but is that heart and soul on the court, much like we've seen Evan Batty do over the years. That I'm the guy to re-spark this team and get them going. And this I can't stress this. I cannot stress this enough. How big these 3 home games coming up are against a Arizona teams that are fantastic and against an Oregon State team that always seems to just surprise us and always gives us a run for our money. That this is the time where this team needs to, like we said, go back to basics, play Colorado branded basketball, really get their feet under themselves and get some momentum going into the remainder of this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think the momentum piece there really is sort of key, because then so we play these next couple we play these next like 3 home games against Arizona State, Arizona, then Oregon State, and then so that's that takes us through next Monday. Then next Thursday we go on the road to California. Then after that we play the Oregon schools in Oregon, and then we only have 2 more home games left in the season, and then it's against the 2 LA teams, right? And so with USC and UCLA, and so it's the kind of thing where we just then we have this 5-game homestand, then we go on a 4-game away stretch where like on the West Coast, where getting some momentum in there and having like sort of like renewed our sense of what kind of basketball is working for us is going to be essential to then be able to go on the road and get wins against a team like Oregon or Stanford, who Oregon was obviously ranked earlier in the year. Stanford is a good team. They play solid basketball and is like absolutely a team that could hand us a loss down the stretch. And then certainly to be able to then because momentum momentum through these home games is going to lead to a hope would in an ideal world they figure out what kind of brand of basketball is going to work for them for the rest of the season. They win these next 3 games at home. They go on the road, they win those 4 games, and then they've got their 2 toughest the toughest games of the remainder of their season come against the 1 and 2 team in the Pac-12 right now. The teams that lead the Pac-12 altogether, which is USC and UCLA. And UCLA has proven itself to be a team to be reckoned with. This season, sort of and absolutely they're just they're a dominant team. And so if CU wants to and then be able to close out our season with a strong record, then to be able to enter the Pac-12 tournament with a decent seed, and then hopefully be able to get out of the Pac-12 tournament with a win, a Pac-12 championship win. All that would set us up for, I would say, better than an 8 seed ranking. I would say likely, a 3 to 4 seed ranking in March Madness. If we don't do that, if we lose, say, half the games left in our schedule, we end the season somewhere, about 21 and what would the numbers be like for that? It'd be like 21 and 6 or something like that. It's just the kind of thing where it's like that wouldn't. Yeah. That's just that it makes a world of difference between being able to enter March Madness with a seed that's going to allow us to potentially certainly have Sweet 16 potential, if not further, or if it's going to pitch us against one of the top 16 to 25 teams in the country, and then have a really tough matchup to begin with, lose that, have it be like, oh, great, we got to March Madness again and we lost right off the bat, and should we really had hope in the first place? And so now's the time when they can sort of they still have time left in the season to be able to decide whether which way that's likely to fall, which way those dominoes are likely to fall. But it is now is sort of that pivot point for whether they manage to turn this into a super successful season that had a slightly bit of a slump sort of right in the middle, or whether it turns into a super successful season overall.
Yeah. Look, over the course of these next 3 weeks, the month of February, this is a time where Colorado really gets to prove if they're, like you said, if they're the team, not the team to beat in the Pac-12, but a team that can go in and win games in March. Like you explained, the big games against Stanford, Oregon, USC, UCLA. 2 of those are away, 2 of those are at home. Look, those games aren't going to be easy. Stanford's going to give you a run. Obviously, Oregon's a really good team, and they can beat you a bunch of ways. But the 2 most important games out of the month of February are the 2 home games against USC and UCLA. It is absolutely imperative. If they lose a game to Cal or Oregon State, they're in some deep doo-doo. Right now I would say they're squarely a tournament team, but like I said, they're treading the water of slipping onto that bubble, and you don't want to be in the bubble with losses to Washington and Utah, and then possibly losses to Oregon State and California on your resume, because that's when a committee looks at you and said, oh, this is the reason why this team's on the bubble. This is the time to get your resume defining wins against not just Stanford and Oregon, because those would be great, but win against USC, win against UCLA would squarely put you into the tournament and kind of give you some relaxation into that Pac-12 tournament. Not saying that they can relax and you want to go in and you want to win it, you want to be the Pac-12 champion, but it is the time where you truly get to see schools' true colors, and that not only goes for Colorado, but that goes for the rest of the Pac-12, and that goes for the rest of the college basketball, just as a whole. That February with big games coming up, that this is the time where teams really get to show their true colors, and this is when you kind of weed out the pretenders, and you really get to see who's for real, who's not. This is Colorado's time to show that they're not a pretender, that they're here to stay, that they're here to compete with the best of the best, not only in the Pac-12, but the best of the best in the nation. So, it really comes down to, what these players can do if they can, regain this confidence, get this footing back, and put themselves on the right path going into a very jam-packed February.
For sure. Yeah. And so they've got 3-day right here. They've got Thursday, until they play Arizona State. And then, it's Thursday, Saturday, Monday, they'll get a little bit of a break, but they've got to travel in between the next Monday to Thursday. And so this is honestly, it's a perfect time for them to be able to, get in, during practice, just really sort of dial some of those, things that have been lacking over the last couple of games, and then be able to bring that back, against A very a talented Arizona State team, that hasn't been phenomenal, but is phenomenally coached. And then, be able to just sort of, as you said, just start building that momentum going into the postseason. And so, now's really the time to start that. And so hopefully these next few rest days can take them into that for sure.
Definitely. With that, Kieran and I want to thank you so much for coming to another episode of Buffalo Dash. The usual end of video kind of stuff. Follow the socials, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Check out the YouTube channel at Dashboards TV. Check out the website, dashboards.tv. Check out Kieran and I's Twitters. Both of them are below our faces. We usually like to watch the games, and I know I tweet, especially against the terrible Pac-12 referees that we get every game, because there's always the anti-Colorado whistles that we always get, and they piss me off to no
Bill
avail.
Walton commentary in there. Love me some Bill Walton Pac-12 commentary.
Nothing but the best for this conference. Nothing but the best. But as always, we'll see you next week. Hopefully, we'll get a pre-show video next week before that Oregon State game, which could be pretty fun. But with that, as always, we want to thank you guys, and Go Buffs.